Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Mom's Favorites, Books My Mother Loved, a memorial for my mother. So we are, of course, if you have been keeping track, which, of course, I don't really believe that many people have been, I am continuing the Merlin series by Mary Stewart. So we are going to be looking at the third book in this series, The Last Enchantment. So, of course, this is a sort of a story of Merlin, one which assumes that he and King Arthur are actually cousins. And so, in the first book, we have the story of a young Merlin and how he sort of learns how to be Merlin, and his discovery that he is the bastard son of Emrys Ambrosius, who becomes the King of Britain. And after Ambrosius dies, then Merlin's uncle, Uther, Uther Pendragon, that guy, he becomes the King of Britain after his brother, who didn't have an heir because, one, Merlin was a bastard and therefore not really able to take the throne, although one assumes that if, either of them had really wanted to swing it, they probably could have. But Merlin didn't want the throne and wasn't inclined to that sort of thing. So he didn't take the throne, and the end of that book was effectively Merlin, upon the impetus caused by his second sight, his ability to see the future, to see things at a distance, to, have various psychic abilities in effect, that caused him to arrange for Arthur, the future King Arthur, to be born. The second book in the series, which was The Hollow Hills, during that, Merlin basically is spending a whole bunch of time arranging for Arthur's care and arranging for Arthur to be taken away, not merely because, it's for his safety, raising him in obscurity so that he doesn't get corrupted or kidnapped or killed or any of the other things that can happen to royal heirs, but also because Uther doesn't want he doesn't want Arthur. The thing is that Uther had desperately wanted another man's wife. He was madly in love with her, couldn't help himself, was losing sleep, blah, blah, blah. It's all very melodramatic and romantic and stuff. And Merlin agreed to help him, not because he thought so much of Uther's desperate love for Igraine or anything else like that, but because he felt compelled by his, magic psychic abilities to do so, because the magic, or what he calls the god or the gods, have been telling him he has to do this, which is basically the only reason that he does help Uther with it. So what happens is Uther sneaks in to see Queen Igraine, and they, have a wild night, and then Igraine's husband, it turns out, has been killed while the two of them were together, and at that point, Uther kind of loses it because he basically says, Merlin, I can't believe you did this. If I hadn't, done all of these things, then her husband would have died, and it would have been totally clear for me to get together with her, and all of this stuff that you've done, how dare you? Anyways, Merlin kind of shrugs it off because he expected it, because Uther never really liked him anyways, so whatever. But what it meant was that Uther felt that that the child he was going to have with Igraine, that child was not going to be sufficiently within the bounds of the marital bed that it was just, it was too hinky, that he wanted to try to have a proper son. Merlin, of course, shrugged and said, well, I happen to know because I have my super psychic magic powers that he's not going to have a valid son, but whatever. So, it's arranged for Arthur to be sent away. He'll be raised in obscurity. He'll be raised in such a way that he will have at least enough of the skill sets to be a king that, if he winds up getting to be king, then it'll be fine. And Uther sort of shrugged and said, okay, well, he sits there, he's in abeyance, I have a potential heir. It's all fine. So Arthur was sent away, raised in obscurity, and Merlin spends a lot of years watching over him, spends a lot of years at a distance traveling the then known world to, just learn stuff, to get more skills, to learn more doctoring skills, to learn more engineering skills, to just see things. So he travels to Rome and the Middle East and so on and so on. All those places that you go. Because, that's what you do. You go to Constantinople. Anyways, so at the end of the last book, or near enough to the end, Arthur is brought back to King Uther because Uther is basically dying. He'd taken a wound several years before, and that's eventually caught up with him, and he's ill, and so on. Arthur comes back, and, he winds up being named the heir proper and given, the king's sword in the midst of battle, and he is, and everyone accepts him as being Uther's son, and he gets crowned, and that whole thing, and of course, Mordred happens. And the thing about Mordred is that, for those who don't know, Mordred is the child of Arthur and his sister / half-sister, depends, I suspect, on some variations, but basically he has a sister. He has two sisters. And he winds up sleeping with her because she is an evil seductress. There are some versions people write where she is not an evil seductress. There are some versions... Marion Zimmer Bradley has written a version where the two of them were both tricked into it, but the point is that she gets pregnant by her brother, and in this particular variant, as in most of these variants, let's be honest, she is evil and is planning on effectively using the child that she and Arthur have together to destabilize the throne. The thing is, of course, that Mordred is always is in a kind of a hinky position because Arthur can't just accept him. He is the child of an illicit, incestuous thing. Now, yes, Arthur didn't know Morgause was his sister at that time. He thought that they were at best cousins because in that moment he thought that he was Merlin's son. Because, of course, they are sufficiently related. They're cousins. He's Uther's son and Merlin is Ambrosius's son. So, the pair of them are their first cousins. So there's enough of a family resemblance there. And Merlin had been watching over him for all of these years. And Arthur had thought that this guy was his father. Anyways, that was the last book. This book, we have a lot of picking up on the story of Mordred. We have a lot of stuff. Man, I talked so much about the last book than I should have been talking about all that stuff when I was talking about the last book, but what can you do? Anyways, so in this book, we pick up with the start of Arthur's term as king. We have Merlin's period as he gets older and older, watching, as sort of a power behind the throne. Not really a power behind the throne. He's an advisor. And they make a lot of, very important notes in this about him being clear to Arthur and to the people around Arthur that, Arthur needs to look like he's the one making the decisions. They cannot have it look like he is constantly asking Merlin, what do I do here? What do I do here? Because he's supposed to be king. So there's a lot of stuff about Merlin doing things behind the scenes and to the side and off. And one of the really interesting things about these books is because there's so much about Merlin, and they're in a lot of ways not much about Arthur, there's a lot of not Arthur in them. King Arthur he's very, very important. It's not that he has no role. It's not that he isn't central and much adored by Merlin, because after all, he is, if nothing else, Merlin's first cousin, but also somebody that Merlin had an actual hand in raising and teaching and a whole bunch of other things. So they've got something of a parent-child relationship and, a familial relationship and all that stuff. And so he's important in that way, but Merlin does a lot of stuff that's nowhere near Arthur. It is in Arthur's name or on his behalf or for him or what have you, but there's a lot of time spent away from him. This is also the book where we get Nimue. Now, what's interesting is Nimue, or Ninian, however you want to put it, turns out in this series to be the much, 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 much younger lover of Merlin, that he's getting on in years. He's in his 50s or 60s, and she's like in her late teens. And it's an interesting relationship in no small part because Nimue is one of those characters who also varies a lot in Arthurian mythology, because sometimes she's the Lady of the Lake and a good guy, and sometimes she's the villainess who locked him away in the Crystal Cave, and sometimes she's a little of both. In this particular book, she is very much depicted as a very young woman who falls in love with Merlin, and he falls in love back with her, and that in the end she sort of sucks all the magic out of him, and in some ways might very well have been the cause of him nearly dying, but at the same time, it's very clearly explained and described that he intends for her to be his successor. That when Arthur finally meets her, one of the things that Merlin straight up says is, this person who I have been looking at so hard as a guy, that I have been looking at so hard because I knew this boy Ninian many, many years ago, and this person looks just like Ninian, and I think it's a boy, and I think it's a replacement for this Ninian boy that I had so much wished I could, raise to be my replacement. And Arthur's like, you do realize this is a girl, don't you? And Arthur's like, and Merlin is just sort of going, what do you mean he is a girl, huh? Or rather, a young woman, huh? Totally didn't expect that. Wasn't looking at it. Anyways, but the point is that he introduces Nimue to Arthur as his successor, as somebody with as much power, or at least a decent simile of power to what Merlin had, to give Arthur a similar enchanter, prophet, what have you. And she winds up doing some stuff that effectively sucks the last of Merlin's power away, and he falls into a coma, and everyone thinks he's dead, and they wall him up in the cave back on Bryn Myrddin, which is where he'd been living for so many years, and he eventually wakes up from his coma alone in there, and has to make his way out. And the end of this book is a very, very touching thing where she's moved on with her life, and she seems very, very genuine and very genuinely upset that she locked him away because she didn't mean to. And it ends with this touching thing of him saying, I'll always be here for my king, and expressing affection, and Arthur visiting him regularly, kind of like visiting Grandpa at the old folks' home, actually. It's it's something of an odd come down ending, and I believe there's at least another book or two in this series, so we'll get back to it, and I'll see you all next week.